The rain has just passed, leaving the cobblestones slick with mud. The air stinks of smoke, ale, and damp wool. A crowd gathers in the marketplace, but they are not here for grain or livestock. They are here for spectacle. At the center stands a woman. A rope digs into the tender flesh of her wrist, knotted tightly, the other end clutched in her husband's calloused hand. She is not shackled by iron, yet the humiliation binds her more cruelly than any chain. The townsfolk jostle for position, children perched on barrels, men clutching tankards. Laughter rolls across the crowd like thunder. The husband lifts his voice, not with tenderness, but with the booming bark of a salesman. "Who'll take her? Who bids?" His wife lowers her head. Her hair is damp, sticking to her face. She dares not speak. To resist would only inflame the crowd's mockery, and resistance is futile. The law itself has silenced her. Coins clink. A man steps forward, inspecting her like he might a cow or horse. He grips her chin roughly, turning her face side to side. A few jeers rise from the crowd. "She's worth no more than a pint." Another calls, "I'll give sixpence and a loaf." This is not a parody. This is not theatre. This was the grim reality of Victorian England, where the poor could not afford the labyrinth of divorce courts, and so men invented their own grotesque substitute, the selling of wives. 2. The onlookers. It was entertainment. The shame of another turned into public amusement. But to the women at the centre, it was a living execution. Their dignity stripped, their lives reduced to transaction. Some were traded for a handful of coins, others for nothing more than ale. Each sale a declaration that her body, her future, her very existence belonged not to herself, but to the man who held the rope. As the deal closes, the rope changes hands. The husband turns away, lighter in pocket, lighter in burden. The crowd disperses, and the woman, trembling and silent, is led away by another man. Her fate sealed not by law, but by mud, mockery, and rope. The clamour of the marketplace fades, but the silence that replaces it is no less suffocating. It is the silence of the law, cold, invisible, and merciless. In Victorian England, a married woman ceased to exist in the eyes of the state. Her name, her earnings, her property, all of it dissolved into the shadow of her husband's authority. She was not a person, but an appendage, a legal ghost bound to the man who claimed her. When her wrist was tied with rope in the market, it was only a mirror of the invisible cords already wound tight by statute and tradition. Inside courtrooms, divorce was a privilege reserved for the wealthy. It required a private act of parliament, mountains of paperwork, and sums of money that a labourer could never dream of earning. For the poor, there was no justice, only improvisation. And so, the law's silence bred its own grotesque ritual, the public sale of wives. To the men, it was a crude solution, a way of cutting through the chains of marriage that the law refused to sever. To the women, it was degradation masquerading as freedom. The legal system had left them defenseless, forcing them to stand bare before neighbors and strangers, their fates bartered like a sack of grain. Picture the cruelty. A woman watching her, dowry vanish, her children claimed by her husband, her body bound to a man she could no longer endure, and the law nodding silently, declaring her suffering invisible. The rope in the market was rough against her skin, but the sharper wound was this: the knowledge that in the eyes of the law, she had never truly belonged to herself at all. The tavern is thick with the stench of stale ale and unwashed bodies. Smoke curls from pipes, dimming the light until the rafters seem cloaked in shadow. A rough cheer erupts as a man drags a woman forward, her wrist bound by a halter, the coarse rope biting into her skin. She stumbles as the crowd clears space, her face pale, streaked with tears, her eyes darting like a cornered animal's. This is no criminal, no thief or debtor. This is a wife, and she is about to be sold. Coins clink against wooden tables, wagers tossed as if she were a racehorse. Some men laugh, others jeer. One reaches out to pinch the fabric of her dress as though testing the quality of livestock. The woman flinches but does not speak. Her silence is both her shield and her humiliation. The bidding begins. Voices rise and overlap, coarse and jovial, as though the fate of a human soul were nothing more than sport. 2 shillings, shouts one. And a pint of porter, calls another, sending the room into laughter. At last, the clinking of coins marks the end. She is led away, the rope handed to her buyer, the crowd cheering as if they had witnessed entertainment rather than degradation. In the markets, the scene is harsher still. Beneath the open sky, women stand with halters tied around their necks, paraded before strangers who lift their chins, inspect their hands, and haggle loudly. Some buyers are secret lovers, seizing a twisted opportunity to legitimize an affair. Others are strangers, men seeking a body, a worker, or worse, a possession to use and discard. Not all women wept. Some stood defiant, their silence a mask for relief, because being sold meant escape from fists and drunken rages, from nights of terror in their own homes. Yet even freedom came at the price of humiliation, freedom purchased in the spectacle of their public shaming. The crowd, drunk with laughter, never saw the scars beneath the silence. They never heard the quiet sob in the corner of the tavern after the jeering ended, or felt the sting of a child's absence when mothers were torn from their families. For the men, wife-selling was a crude loophole in a merciless law. For the women, it was a wound carved deep into flesh and memory. The clink of coins fades, but the echo lingers. A nation that permitted its wives to be auctioned like beasts in broad daylight, while the law looked on and said nothing. The marketplace ends with laughter, but the silence that follows is heavier still. The woman, once surrounded by jeers, now finds herself in an unfamiliar room, her halter removed, but her freedom no less bound. The bed before her is not her own. The man who owns it is not her husband. He is her buyer. For some, the sale meant little change. One prison exchanged for another, beaten in one home, degraded in the next. Her new husband treats her not as a partner, but as property paid for in coin. He points to the hearth, to the bed, to the children she will now raise that are not her own. Every glance reminds her that she is an outsider, a stranger in the very household she is meant to serve. For others, the fate was darker still. Sold not to a home but to exploitation, a servant in name, but in truth, an object, used, discarded, silenced. Nights stretched long in these households, where the laughter of the marketplace curdled into the rustle of sheets and the weight of a man she never chose. There were no laws to protect her, no courts to return her children, no family to reclaim her dignity. Once sold, her identity dissolved into the shadows of her new life. Some women never saw their children again, their names erased from memory as though they had died. And in a way, they had. The bed of strangers was colder than the auction block. There, humiliation was brief, a spectacle shared with a crowd. Here, it was private, relentless, and endless. Every dawn she woke not in freedom, but in captivity, her life reduced to survival, beneath a roof that was never truly hers. The marketplace roared with laughter, but in the shadows of the crowd stood smaller figures, children, their eyes wide, their hands gripping the hems of worn coats. They were not meant to understand, yet the lesson was seared into them forever. A boy no older than 10 watches as his mother is led forward, a halter cutting into her skin. He recognizes the rope, the same one once used to guide cattle in the fields. The crowd jeers, ale sloshes, coins clink. His mother does not meet his gaze. Perhaps she cannot bear to. When the bidding ends, the rope passes into another man's hand. The boy lunges, shouting, but his arm is seized, pulled back, as the crowd erupts in laughter. That cry, raw, desperate, becomes the last sound his mother hears from him as she is led away. For some children, this was the final moment they ever saw their mother alive. She vanished into another town, another house, another bed, while they grew up with only whispers of her name. The absence hollowed them, teaching them not of love, but of disposability, that a woman, even a mother, could be traded like an ox at market. Daughters learned early what the law refused to teach, that their own bodies were currency, their fates tied to men's bargains. Sons carried the memory of humiliation, the image of a mother stripped not of clothing, but of dignity. The marketplace was not just a stage for cruelty against wives, it was a classroom of violence for the next generation. Childhood ended in a single afternoon, not with death, but with the knowledge that love could be auctioned, that family could dissolve with the slap of a coin on wood. The silence of those children became the echo of a nation, a generation scarred not only by poverty, but by the spectacle of their mothers being sold before their eyes. The year was 1857. A cold mist clung to the cobblestones as dawn broke over a marketplace in England. The stalls smelled of damp hay, of butchered meat, of ale spilled the night before. And there, among the crates and barrels, stood a woman with a rope knotted around her wrist. The rope did not bind her to a post. It tethered her to her husband, as if she were livestock. The crowd was smaller than in decades past, but still they came. Farmers, drunkards, tradesmen, even curious boys who had heard whispers of this strange ritual. They gathered not just to buy or bid, but to witness a fading tradition. The woman's cheeks were hollow, her eyes bruised with sleeplessness. She stood silent as her husband barked the terms of her sale. A few coins, a pint of ale, a new beginning for him and a new prison for her. By now, the newspapers had begun to expose these scenes. Words like barbaric, uncivilized, and cruelty filled their columns. Reformers wrote letters demanding that England, the empire that claimed moral superiority over the world, end this grotesque spectacle. But the law remained slow, and the market still echoed with the sounds of coins clattering onto wood, the mutters of bargaining, the muffled sobs of women. Some police officers turned their backs, pretending not to see. Others lingered on the edges, watching with silent complicity. Even in its final days, wife-selling was tolerated until the disgust of reformers outweighed the amusement of crowds. The last recorded sales took place in shadows, half hidden, as if those who carried them out knew their cruelty, no longer had a place in daylight. And then, slowly, it ended. Not with a righteous decree, not with sudden justice, but with a whimper, a practice rotting in shame, suffocated by exposure and outrage. Yet for the women who stood tethered in those final years, there was no triumph, no vindication. Their humiliation was complete before history closed the book. The rope was cut at last, but its fibers lingered in memory, a reminder that even in the so-called age of progress, civilization often arrives too late for its victims. The markets grew quiet. The halters were put away. The jeering crowds dispersed, and wife-selling slipped into history's shadows. But silence does not erase scars. Even as the practice vanished, its ghost remained. The same laws that once allowed a man to barter his wife still denied her control of her own body, her wages, her children. Victorian women walked through streets lit by gas lamps, past factories roaring with steam, into homes where progress promised comfort. Yet inside those walls, the chains of obedience remained unbroken. What does it mean for a society to call itself civilized while treating women as property. For centuries, the answer had been cloaked in custom, in the smirk of a judge, in the shrug of a policeman who turned away. Wife-selling had been defended as tradition, as harmless spectacle. But the women who stood with ropes at their wrists knew the truth. Custom was simply cruelty in costume. History records the age as one of triumph, the rise of railways, the empire that spanned oceans, the industrial titans who remade the world. Yet beneath the coal smoke and clanging steel, in muddy marketplaces across England, another story unfolded. One of humiliation, tears, and silence. A history where women's lives were not written in gilded books, but erased in taverns and sold for a few coins. The echo of those chains can still be heard, not in the clatter of markets, but in the subtle ways society continued to remind women of their place. Even into the 20th century, the law struggled to admit that women had rights beyond their husband's reach. The cruelty lingered long after. The rope was cut, and so as we close the chapter on wife-selling, we must not mistake its end for justice. Its victims found no liberation in reform. Their names are lost, their stories scattered in court records and newspaper clippings. They were mothers, daughters, wives, reduced to property, then forgotten. Empires are not only built on railways, steel, and kings. They are built on silence. The silence of women sold in markets, whose suffering greased the gears of progress. And though the markets are gone, the echoes remain.